I'd like to begin by thanking everyone for posting their questions and making this video possible. In the last poll question I posted, asking if John Donadio should have been inducted, 88% said no and 12% said yes. But pay no mind to that percentage because at least half of them are trolls. And in case they didn't receive the memo, nothing they say or do matters. Speaking of which, I want to give a heads up to the person hacking into my email, phone, and social media accounts. Don't cry when the hammer falls. Okay, let's get to the questions. And please remember to hit the like icon. It was stated that in the 1970s that the Lucchese family was one of the wealthiest, having more known millionaire members than any other family. How does this compare to the Lucchese family you knew? As far as millionaires, during my time, most of the bosses and some captains, as well as old-timers, were all sitting pretty financially. And answering a question with a question, where do you think that money initially came from? Has a shelved guy ever refused to come back to the family? And what would happen if he refused to come back? I never knew anyone in that situation, someone who was shelved and when called for, refused to come in. But if that were to happen, he'd have the administration very angry with him. And like myself, they'd go looking for him, although foolishly, they never shelved me. Did you ever feel untouchable while in life? Untouchable, no. When a member's out in public, let's say in a restaurant or nightclub, there's not a sign above his head announcing who he is. Every person in this world is prone to being touched if the time and the circumstances calls for it. Was there ever a situation where you were reminded of your own mortality? The situation I could think of is anyone who's been in prison understands that any day could be your last. In correlation to this question, a person wants to know if a made guy hits someone who isn't made and that person hits them back, can they be killed? I guess it all depends on who gets hit. Remember, again, you're not wearing a sign that lets people know who you are. They don't know, and by all rights, they're not supposed to. A lot of mafia members in the US have surnames with geographical meaning: Castellano, Catalano, Argentina, Salerno, Lombardo, etc. This seems less common among Italians in Italy. Does it have something to do with the immigration process? I'll bring to mind the movie The Godfather. Prior to the character Vito Corleone fleeing Italy, his name was Vito Andolini, and while on Ellis Island, he's asked to state his name, but remains quiet. An immigration officer reads a card that's attached to him that states his name as Vito Andolini Corleone, and Corleone being the town where he's from. The other officer puts his name down as Vito Corleone. I'm not suggesting this happened to everyone, but keep in mind, the immigration officers were not fans of Italians, so to use a hometown in place of a surname was common. One person posted a question: what happens if a guy kicks up an empty envelope? Let me make this response as respectful as I can. What do you think would happen? Next question. I recently saw a list with all names of made men from each family. How can anyone feel safe conducting business with the number of people around you that can possibly sell you out? I have a question. Was that list passed to you? You're mentioning a list that some fanboy created and posted on the internet. So let's call it what it is, an unofficial list. Secondly, just as in a legitimate workspace where you work with numerous people, treachery and deceit runs in the veins of many. Here's another doozy, as they say. And I view some of the questions on the same level as, what would happen if you jumped off the Empire State Building? Nonetheless, here we go. Would a mob guy get a pass from the family if he gave the government information regarding possible terroristic threats? Would he still be labeled a rat or shelved? I love how some of these people love to use that word and never spent an hour in the street. Anyway, I'll answer the question again with a question. If you're married and get caught screwing with your wife's cousin, would it be okay with your wife because you kept it in the family? In the future, I respectfully hope the questions are not of this caliber. And of course, now I'll get 25 ridiculous questions from the troll community. When you were in the gambling business, what type of gambling did you operate? And was it a good business? It was sports betting, and not on any big level. I happened to get out of it before making any large amounts of money. From your experience, is it just as important to turn down a money-making opportunity as it is to have one? One too good to be true, and too good even by crime standards. Good question. It's the meaning of remaining free or losing your freedom. Personally, I've turned down numerous deals that would have netted me a large sum of money. Again, in that life, greed equals prison. I've heard of social clubs in places throughout New York and Long Island. Were there any in Staten Island? None that I knew of. We would meet at Big John's Cigar Lounge, which wasn't necessarily a social club, although we treated it as one. Do you think Jerome Johnson, who shot Joe Colombo, knew it was a suicide mission? Or was he just unlucky and couldn't blend into the crowd and get away in time? In my opinion, no. I don't believe he thought he was on a suicide mission. And just as Lee Harvey Oswald, I believe he was just a patsy for a higher authority. You never hear about a guy who pays off a loan shark amicably. They're always squeezed or juiced till they can't pay anymore. Are there instances where a guy pays off the loan and everyone goes about their business? There's a misconception. More loans are paid off without issue than not. This person also wants to know if it's common practice to keep squeezing a guy who's paid off his loan. Absolutely not. If word of someone doing that got out, no one's going to borrow money from him. Have you ever felt bad for working someone over? At the time, no. But I have apologized to a particular person who reached out to me, and he appreciated my doing so. Let's not forget, the majority of these guys are either involved or associated to the mob and are not innocent victims. In your opinion, which administration was the better one? The initial one you knew or the current one? To start with, the initial administration was intact with the exception of Vic being incarcerated. We had an acting boss, an underboss, and a consigliere. Whereas the administration during the transition was a fractured one. We had a new acting boss, we had an underboss that was going away, and no consigliere. The current administration I haven't dealt with. But to answer the question, let me put it this way. That old administration didn't turn on me. Have you had any interaction with Danny Rizzo? Given his relatively senior age, was he active in the crew? Danny was a part of our crew, and I've been in his company a few times, but not many because he was diagnosed with cancer, which ultimately took his life. This next question came through an email. You've posted a video relating to serial killers. Do you consider Charles Caniglia one too? Obviously, there was more that fit the category besides Roy DeMeo and Tommy Patera, Charles being one of them. Another person questioned the fact that Anthony Secafico was taking a bus to work. Let me just say, I took the Long Island Railroad into the city every morning and knew of plenty of guys who also used public transportation, not out of necessity, but rather out of convenience. Let me quickly mention the Super Thanks icon, which helps maintain this podcast. The commitment and effort put into these videos are extremely time-consuming, and you can find that icon down below in the 3-dot dropdown. And for the final question, do you think the mob will still be around in the year 2030? 6 years, unfortunately, go by very quickly, and I absolutely believe the mob will still be in existence. However, as I've mentioned, the Lucchese family began inducting legitimate businessmen, and it's possible the other families have or will follow suit. So with that said, by inducting legitimate people, you also invite legitimate thinking minds, which I feel will come back to bite them one day. For instance, if one of these guys have to serve a year or two, I believe they could handle it. But let the same guy get jammed up good and face 20 to 30 years, and you'll see how quickly their legitimate mindset kicks in.